write that brand brief, not just about the television commercial that you're going to do, but write that brand brief about every single sense. So what are people going to smell? What are people going to see? What are people going to taste? What are they going to hear? All those things have to tie up together.
Welcome to the My Future Business Show, where we get you in front of your best audience and keep you there. Not only are we interviewing the biggest names in business to help you become even more successful, we're inviting you to book your spot on the show to help you grow your business. So at the end of the call, make sure you fill in the interview application form at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. Welcome back to the show. My name's Rick Nusky. I am your host. And if this is your first time with us on the My Future Business Show, you are in for a treat. And for those who have supported the show for any length of time, you know what you're in for. And thank you so very much for your support. Now, on today's call, I have the pleasure of welcoming author, consultant, and managing director at Cerenti Marketing Group, Mr. Sandeep Dayal. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Rick. It's my pleasure to be here.
Oh, likewise. It's absolutely mine too, given your background and what we're going to be talking about today. And in fact, we're going to be talking about your book, Branding Between the Ears, and we're also going to be talking about the importance of rethinking how to appeal to consumers using an interesting field called cognitive science to build lasting customer connections, and importantly, epic brands. Now, that's a lot to get through in a very short amount of time, so I'm pretty much sure we could have many, many calls. But before we do that, Sandeep, I'd love to learn a little bit about your life. Where are you calling in from today?
So I'm calling in from Chicago today.
Fantastic.
And yeah.
Has that been home for you forever, or?
No, originally I'm from India. So, I grew up in India. I went through my high school as well as my engineering education in India. Worked there for a while, actually. Mm-hmm. And then way back in 1987, I came to the United States to do my MBA. And so for 2 years, I was in school at the Yale School of Management.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. I wonder, what's the cultural differences like, and have you been able to apply those differences in your work life today?
That's really a great question, Rick, because, as you know, my work is all in branding, and the book is called Branding Between Your Ears.
Yep.
Brands, when you think about them, are global, right? I mean, these are certainly the biggest brands that we all know and love. They are all global brands. They're sold in 70 different countries, and they are, loved by different people and in those different cultures. So this whole business of my growing up in a different country, having experienced a very different culture, was in my view, certainly I feel like it was very helpful in giving me that sense of perspective on what are the common elements between different cultures and how things can be different, and to be able to appreciate the differences where they occur, and to be able to appreciate the similarities when they occur as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again for sharing. Now, just for context, everybody's on the show with us today. Sandeep has worked with the likes of Pfizer, AbbVie, HSBC, Santander, Kraft, and Conagra, just to name a few. There's probably a long list of brands out there. Can only imagine. How is it that you get to be so well known? You've obviously done some really good branding. Imagine that.
Yeah, no, and that's, I think, one of the privileges of working in a consulting environment, if you will, right? So I've been doing consulting for more than 20 years now. And the nice thing about consulting is that you do, travel to different places, you meet people in different cultures, and you work with a lot of different companies over that time frame. So yes, in fact, over my lifetime, I've probably worked, and this is just a guess, that over 100 different engagements with 40 to 50 different companies around the world on multiple brands. And so it gives you this unique perspective of being able to look at things, look at them from the point of view of different companies, different types of products, different types of market dynamics, and so on. And it's a kind of like a test bed or a learning school that you go to all the time.
Well, we know that businesses are really just a combination of different people trying to achieve an outcome. Now, what are some of the commonalities that you've seen across these hundreds of different major brands?
Sure. So, I mean, it's interesting because, every time we did global market launches, right, when we were launching different products, so you would typically do research for those brands in 10 different countries across Europe, Asia, Latin America, United States, and so on. Would pick the major markets and you would do that. And it's interesting because a lot of the times I did find that there were a lot more commonalities across cultures than we would normally think. You would expect everything to be very different. And the reason for that is that at the end of the day, people have very similar needs, pain points, and unmet requirements that are across cultures. And therefore, you see, when you talk to them, we worked on a product called Pediasure, which is a children's product, but you can see that the angst that the mothers have about bringing up their children and their kids properly are very similar when you go across different cultures. So I would say, the needs, the attitudes, and so on, many times are very similar.
Do you think that story has its place in branding?
Stories.
Yep, telling stories, being able to communicate your
Oh,
brand through stories.
oh yes. Storylining is a very big deal these days. And I think you hear a lot about it. But it has to do with the fact, as we're learning more and more about how our brains work, what we're finding is that brains tend to respond very well when they're told when they're told stories. So your brain will respond to something, absorb the information better when it's in the form of a storyline. And it's not just storylines; it can be patterns,
Yeah.
it can be sounds, it can be different things. But those are the things that the brain responds to particularly well. What it doesn't respond well to is just lists of things, which is what marketers in the past have done, which is that they look at their products, they see how those products are different from the competitor's product, right? They make a list of those things. And then when you go talk to them, they say, you know what, let me tell you, my brand is about these three things, right? But those three things are a disconnected list
Yep.
and nobody other than the marketer, and even sometimes the marketers themselves forget what's on that list. So no, storylines are very, very important in marketing. And that doesn't just mean that the brand itself has a story, and it can mean that, but it doesn't have to be that. But what it means is that the brand has to be able to imagine itself in your story.
Yeah.
So what is the role that it's going to be playing in your life? And being able to tell that story is very central to creating exceptional brand experiences.
So with branding nowadays, small versus large organisations, I often see it must be masses of amounts of money being flushed into marketing for no apparent outcome for big businesses. What is that about?
Yeah, you mean in just in terms of the spending that goes on
Yeah, it's
brands,
it's
right?
almost like they just want to be seen.
Yes, yes, and we just came through from the Super Bowl, right? And the Super Bowl ads were reportedly selling for something like $6.5 million for a 30
Wow, get
second
out.
spot. Yeah, and many brands chose to do 1 minute ads, right? So that's $13 million right there. And so, yes, a lot of money gets spent. I do a lot of work in healthcare. So when pharma companies launch their products, it's not, a typical product will take something in the order of 200 to $500 million to launch. So a lot of money does get spent on branding and on the other aspects of marketing, and it doesn't always pan out. And so it is becoming so much more important these days to really understand what works, what doesn't work. It was hard before, but I think with the advance of the neurosciences, with the advance of understanding more specifically just how our brain works, how do we actually make choices? Because remember, branding is all about making choices, right? How do you prefer one product over the other? It's choice. But we are being much, much more precise these days about understanding how exactly we make choices so that accordingly we can be more precise about making sure that what we do in marketing, the hundreds of millions of dollars that we do spend on marketing, that those dollars are spent more wisely.
So I wonder, with smaller businesses, I'm not sure what your audience and market focus is. What are some of the, I guess, do you deal with medium-sized organisations, and what is different about their branding as opposed to the big players?
Well, I mean, brands are important to everybody, right? Whether you're a small business that's just starting out, or you are a multi-billion dollar enterprise. Brands are important to everybody,
Mm.
and the difference is that if you're a small business owner, you have to do it yourself,
Yeah.
right? You pick up a book, you buy a book, you pick up a book, and you take some tips from it and you do it yourself. Whereas when you're dealing with major businesses, they have the money, so they spend it on making sure that they're able to access the best experts in branding
Hmm.
and naming the product and looking at how Salesforce will work and all of these different things of marketing they are able to do. But at the heart of it, it is the same thing. It is about why people will choose your brand versus other brands. It is about what people see in your product. Because, I often talk about this, Rick, as brands are kind of this invisible part of the product, right? It's the
Yeah.
part that you don't see.
Yeah.
It's the soul. A lot of people say it's the soul. Some people will say it's the DNA. And that's why it is so hard to get your mind around it because, how do you see a person's soul, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing with brands. Like, how do you see the soul? But with all of the advances that are taking place, we still can't see a person's soul,
Yeah.
but we are beginning to see a lot more into the soul of a brand and being able to blueprint that.
Do you rely on quantitative and qualitative data when assisting businesses to set up their branding?
Oh, yes, absolutely. That's a yes and a yes. And I
Mm.
think I would say I'm a big believer in the qualitative research portion of research that is done.
Hmm.
And and the reason for that is that, look, I often say to people that you can't really do marketing until you get in front of your customers, right? And qualitative research is one of those vehicles that provides you that opportunity to get in front of your customers, whether you're doing individual, what we call in-depth interviews with them, where you might sit down with one person and do deep dive with them, whether you're going to a person and visiting their home, or you're doing some focus groups and so on. And I usually recommend you do a little of all of those different things because you see different sides of people. But it is 100% very important to get in front of people, in front of your customers, and talk to them and really understand what they're saying. And the unfortunate thing is that as you go through your career in marketing, as you become, you start as a marketing manager, then you become a director, and
Mm.
then at some point you become a vice president, and then you might even become the general manager or the president of the business. The more senior you become, the less and less you get out in front of the customers, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So that is one of the unfortunate truths, that the most skilled people in the organization are spending less and less time with their customers. So I sometimes, when I'm working with my clients, I'll go to the division president and drag him out to those focus groups. I'll drag him out and say, I'm going to be talking to your customer on the phone. You listen in, be there. You don't have to say anything, just listen in. Because, these are the smartest people. They hear certain things that I may not, and I hear certain things. And despite all of the advantages or the advances in big data and artificial intelligence and so on, there is no replacement for one human listening to another human.
Absolutely. That's really sage advice. Thank you very much for sharing. Now, I see that there's two types of customers or audiences within an organization. Obviously, the external one that you provide products and services to, but you also have the internal. Is that really what we've just been talking about, getting in front of the employees and stakeholders inside the business?
Well, most of the work that I do is really related to that external side, right? Which
Right.
is with brands as they face their customers. But on occasions, um, there have been instances where we are invited to also do the internal piece of the work with our clients.
Mm.
And in that sense, it is very similar work because in those instances, those stakeholders, you have to treat those stakeholders as your customers, right?
Yeah.
They are the ones that are working for your brand. They are the ones that are consuming your brand and so on. So, certainly the way they interact and the relationships that they have and so on can be a little different, but nonetheless, really understanding what is their angst, what are their needs and so on. And how do you strike those special empathetic connections with your stakeholders, your employees and so on is just is also very important. But obviously there's a whole
Oh, right.
science around
Yeah.
that aspect as well.
So when we talk about cognitive sciences, I can't help but think about the importance and relevance of color in brand. Can you share a little bit about color?
Yeah, and I more broadly in my book I talk about sensory branding, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is so there's one chapter on it, um, and it is that we perceive everything that we perceive about things comes through our senses. So we perceive color, we have other visual cues, we have the sound and so on. So all of these different things that we sense through our five senses um, are are part of what our perception of the brand is, right? So when you go to Starbucks, that whole you see the visual is very important, right? When you
Mm-hmm.
walk into the store, you see the cup, you see the green logo of Starbucks on the cup, and you also see your name written on the, all these different things
Yep.
are are ways in which the brand makes a relationship with you. Now, colors themselves, literally can mean different things in different countries. And companies like Coca-Cola and so on, which is the most famous, they do a lot of research to make sure that the color red, for example, in their instance, has positive connotations in most of the cultures. They're everywhere. And in most cases, the color red ends up having some very positive connotations. And therefore, it is something that means something to their brand. But it is just one aspect of the brand. So when you're constructing these brand experiences, what I tell my clients is that write that brand brief, not just about the television commercial that you're going to do,
Mm-hmm.
but write that brand brief about every single sense. So what are people going to smell? What are people going to see? What are people going to taste? What are they going to hear? All those things have to tie up together. And when you walk into, stores like Burberry, so I live in Chicago, and if you walk on Michigan Avenue, you can be, you could be literally 5 blocks away from the Burberry store. But just when you look at it from there, you can see all the visuals that they have around the tartan design that they have is right all over that building, right? The
Yep. Yep.
colors that they use are like the tartan overcoats that they have. You
Mm-hmm.
walk into the store, they pipe in certain special smells in there to, bring out a unique experience for you, which is very defined with them. So, it's not just for places like Starbucks, which literally have a coffee and, the coffee beans are being ground and you have the aroma of the coffee. Even in places like Burberry's, in places like Singapore Airlines, in places like different hotels like the Marriott's and so on in their upper scale properties, these things are very specifically engineered so that when you think of that brand, you are getting that total sensory experience. And the interesting thing about that, Rick, is that sometimes even when some of the elements that are missing,
Yep.
your brain can actually just imagine the missing elements
Oh,
and
fill the
still
gaps.
reconstruct the brain. Yeah, so I mean that can fill the gaps. And so so you can so it's a very powerful thing to be able to really think through your brand in a very specific and systematic way. And a lot of brands do this.
You know what? I can tell that there are clearly many different layers, many different elements. But we have a lot of people on the show that are very large businesses, but we also have some beginners. And I think a lot of people get caught up with thinking brand is nothing more than a logo or having a name that's memorable and easy to spell. What would you say
Yeah,
to those who are starting out? Where would they start, do you think? You talked about your brief.
yeah, yeah. And so typically when we are, so the starting point for brands, obviously is the discovery of the DNA, right? What is it your
Mm,
brand is going to be about? So, and in my book, I spend a lot of time talking about how do you actually design brand? How do people make choices? And that gets you to a point where at least you've defined what your brand is going to be all about, right? It's DNA, it's soul, whatever, whichever way you think of that. Once you've done that, then you have to think about every single way in which a customer comes across your brand so that you can engineer each of those elements very specifically to be aligned with your strategy. So let me give you an example so that it's not so theoretical. If you take something simple, like one of our clients is a company called Conagra, which has a product called the Act 2 popcorn, right? So it's microwavable popcorn. The brand name is called Act 2. But what they did, and this was done long back, that when they came out with their popcorn, the product that was most successful for them was something called the movie theater butter popcorn, right? That's what it was called. And you can just, look at those words and you can see what the strategy is. What they're trying to do is to make you feel like, when you pop those kernels in your microwave, you're going to be able to replicate or be, have the same sensations of that experience that you have when you actually go to a movie theater, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Where you go to a movie, you get this big bucket of popcorn, and then you see whatever it is, a great James Bond movie and so on. That whole experience gets merged in your brain, right? All those things just get merged into your brain. And all that the Conagra people are doing in this case is just reminding you that, look, when you pop these kernels in your microwave, you're going to have something that's very similar to that experience. So that's kind of the, whole strategy. But when you buy that box, what you're going to see is that the box itself is designed with all of those cues. So there is like on the box itself, there's a picture of like a film reel, and on the reel itself is where the name is, Movie Theater Butter Popcorn. And then on top of it, there is like all these incandescent lights, the light bulbs that you would see, right? Yep. And which is very typical in Hollywood and so on, right? So you see, so they have all these movie-like elements built into that box, which are, consciously, subconsciously designed to make you think that you're having as great an experience as you would if you were sitting in a movie theater. And, there is all kinds of research that has been done which says that these things are very true. So, for example, people have found that Mexican food, if you're having a Mexican food in a restaurant which is playing Mexican music and, all of that is going on, that same piece of food, that same serving is going to taste better there than in a place where that is not replicated. So all these things have an impact on us. And therefore, whether you're a small restaurant or you're a big company like Conagra or Kraft, Mondelez, one of these companies, you have to think about these things very deliberately. And the good news is you don't have to be big. If you think about these things, if you are thoughtful about these things, then you can create some wonderful brands and wonderful experiences.
So do you think the advent of social media and our interconnected world that we live in, the globalization of information, do you think it's easier for small brands to seem big?
I think so. Although marketing, there are not too many shortcuts in marketing. So marketing is always expensive, and you can sometimes get lucky, on social media. So I do think that in that sense, social media has had a big play, which is that sometimes you may, put up a video and so on. And, the famous example here is of the Dollar Shave Club, where the young man who came up with this whole idea, he was really struggling. And then he put this like a 3-minute video, which was like full of angst, and he's describing his frustration about how the big companies were just kind of gypping you and, charging you an arm and a leg for essentially, razor blades. And that whole angst that came, it was so authentic. It was so real that people started watching that video and just, sending it to other people and so on. And you've seen things like memes and so on, which come up, which can take a life of their own on media like TikTok and YouTube and what have you. And so there is that interesting opportunity that is available for even entrepreneurs who are starting out with small businesses. At the same time, social media per se is becoming very expensive.
Oh yeah.
So when you actually go out on Facebook and so on, and or Google and so on, and you buy search words and you buy certain strategies for certain keyword strategies and so on, those things cost, so those things add up very quickly. You go to some influencers who have 100,000 people, like the famous football stars and so on. If you want to use them as an influencer on some of your campaigns, you're going to find that you have to pay, $250,000, $500,000. And that's not always something that's within reach for some of the smaller businesses. But nonetheless, there are opportunities there, but it requires that methodical thought and that real insight into what is going to really fly with people.
So we've just really touched on virality, haven't we? Is there
Yes, yes,
is there anything
yes.
different to add to that?
I think you can. There's all kinds of books on viral marketing, so I'm not going to necessarily get into that in that much depth. But I think the one area that my book does touch on is what I was talking about with the Dollar Shave Club, where when you uncover a certain deep angst that exists in people, right? Then people do like to, suddenly people understand, oh my gosh, these guys really get me.
They get me.
Oh, I feel this chemistry, I feel this connection to them. And that's when people start talking about you. And that's what you want, right? In viral marketing, you want to tap into things that people are going to talk about.
Yeah.
And there are a number of brands that have been very successful with that. And I call them, brands with empathy. I call them brands with values and so on. And these are brands that establish those connections that that allow you to be very successful in that viral effect.
So this is where I start to think about differentiation. Is it more important to focus on differentiation in your marketing, or just focus on doing what you do well?
Yeah, so I mean, differentiation is important. It's not it's not something that you should shy away from. However, just thinking that you are going to find this magical difference in your product versus competing products and be able to then win the game, that happens very rarely, right? I mean, we live in a hyper-competitive world.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to come up with something that somebody else is not going to copy in, zero time, literally, right? So products are getting very, very similar. And that's why the brands themselves, which is the unseen element behind the product, become very important, because you differentiate yourself on that particular aspect. So, we were talking about angst. So one of the brands that got me sort of started on this journey, or certainly reflecting on marketing in different ways, different way was, Dove soap by Unilever.
Yep.
And Dove, 15 years, 20 years back, whatever that was, they did this interesting campaign, which they called the Real Beauty campaign. And what they found was that when they did research, and they did research across the world, they found that most of the marketing and most of the commercials that were being seen on television and print media and so on were actually making women feel worse about their bodies. And we're talking about beauty products here, right? Because you could see these super thin, perfect models and so on. And most women would look at those things and say, I can never be that, right? So they would feel worse about themselves. And that was not necessarily the message on those ads, but that's what those ads were doing. So Unilever discovered this. And so what they did with Dove was they started putting all these billboards around the country where they had just, normal women.
Normal people,
on those boards, right? And when I say normal, in the sense of, women that you will normally encounter in your life, right? At work, your sisters, your mothers, and, older people, younger people, darker people, lighter, all of those. And they just put all those people on those boards, and they just had a little logo there that said Dove. So think about that. And that became one of the most successful campaigns ever, not just in the US, but all around the world, in places like, Brazil and in Europe and in, all of these places. So you think about that and you say, wait a minute, weren't they supposed to be talking about their soap and how their soap is different? Like, say something about how creamy it is, or or how good it is at providing moisture, or how good it is at cleansing, or what, how come they didn't do any of that? They just said Dove and they say Real Beauty and they have all these women there. But that struck such a chord that people started writing about it. People started saying, hey, that's how I feel, and da 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 da. And Dove became one of Dove, the body wash and the soap became one of the leading products in its category without ever talking about the differences in the product.
Yeah,
And I'm
wow.
not saying you need to do that all the time, but it's a great example of something that illustrates that extreme where somebody just doesn't even talk about their product. So that's what, that's it. So you have to understand what this brand soul is and how you can incorporate, how you develop that soul into your brand, because that is what is going to help you differentiate yourself in a manner that is hard to replicate by your competitors.
So that's really, that Dove experience was more about the experiential part of branding, isn't it?
Yeah, it was about, establishing a unique chemistry and with the owner, with the customers, and being able to say to them, we understand where you come from,
Yeah.
right? And look at it this way, Rick. If you and I sit down together and we feel like we understand each other, that we have a common shared chemistry, right? Then whatever else I say will seem that much more credible to you, right? Whereas with someone that you don't have that chemistry with, that you feel like, oh, that person doesn't get me, then
Mm-hmm.
whatever else they say, even if it's right, you're not
Yep.
going to really connect with it, right?
Yep.
So that's what that piece of branding is about. And in my book, I call that brand vibes. It's one of the three components of cognitive brands, but that's where that whole piece is encompassed.
Do you think consumers, by and large, are far more savvier today? And does that make branding difficult?
Yeah, I mean, I would, certainly not disagree with that, which is that consumers are savvier. Um, and in that sense, does it make things difficult? Well, it makes things difficult if you're planning to be, less less than transparent, right?
Yes. Well,
So
that's what I was going to ask you about ethics in marketing. Does that obviously plays a part?
yes, it does. And, but nonetheless, I think as marketers, we also have much better tools today,
Hmm.
right? So it's a balance, the consumers are getting smarter, but so are marketers.
Yeah.
And we have a lot more insight into how the brain works and how people think, how their conscious thinking is, how their subconscious thinking is. We're getting smarter about all of these things. So you can have fears on both sides, right? You can have fears that the consumers are getting too smart. You can have fears that the marketers are getting too smart.
So, with your book right between the ears, how long did this take to write you? For you to write, should I say?
I'm sorry, can you say
How
that
long did
again?
your book take to write?
Oh, um, I wrote the book over, I would say, in 1 year, but, I was putting a lot of time into really doing this. But the work that has gone into the book, the case studies and so on, were things that we have been working on for the last 20 years.
Yeah, wow.
So, yeah, so I don't think I could have written the book in 1 year if we hadn't been actually working on applying cognitive sciences to brands for the last 15 or so years.
Yeah, look, this has just been an absolutely gem of a conversation. Now, if you don't mind, Sandeep, where can people both find you should they want to learn more about you, but also where are they going to be able to get this wonderful book?
Yeah, so the book, I happen to have a bunch of them there and one in
Beautiful.
my
I love
hands
it.
right there.
I'm a blue boy. I
Branding,
love it.
branding between the years.
Yep.
And, the book is available online pretty much everywhere, at Walmart, at Amazon, at, Barnes and Nobles and so on, all the usual stores that you would go to. If you happen to live in another country, it is again available online in some of the favorite bookstores that you might have in your own country. You can get more information about me on my author website, which is sandeepdayal.com. And I do publish some blogs and so on, just commenting on different things. Right now, I wrote a blog just last week about all the ads that came on Super Bowl. So if you get interested in all the things that happen with branding, certainly sign up there and you will get some updates from time to time from me.
Look, there's some great content on there. I was actually looking at it before. You've got the blog post. The one that caught my attention was fear-based marketing. There's just so much great content for people to consume. Go definitely have a look at it. If you're on the show today, make sure to visit sandeepdayal.com. I'll be providing that link below this post no matter where you see it. Make sure to go and connect with Sandeep. And Sandeep, what a wonderful call. Thank you so very much for joining me on the show today.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed it very much.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the call, then make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, share us with your friends, and book your spot on the show at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. And if you're looking for solutions that will help grow your business, then visit myfuturebusiness.com/shop.